My mother was the Queen for a very long time. And although you kind of know that this might happen, you don't really think about it very much. Not least of all because the monarchy is about continuity.
Buckingham Palace is entering the final hours of preparation for a high-stakes diplomatic gala, where the British royal family will host a prominent head of state under the gaze of the global lens. But before the lights even flicker to life, the wings are shaken by a silent confrontation. Catherine, Princess of Wales, versus Queen Camilla. The spark was a seemingly small request. Camilla wished to wear the Rose of Windsor Tiara, an iconic piece once belonging to the late Queen. Princess Anne refused, citing that the tiara was currently undergoing maintenance. However, tensions reached a breaking point when Camilla caught wind that those close to Anne intended to hand that very symbol to Catherine as a pointed choice. Then, just a day before the event, the jewelry vanished during internal transport. Security immediately locked down the palace, extracting surveillance data and vetting every individual with access. The investigation swiftly led to a shocking destination, the private home of Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter, where the authentic set was discovered alongside evidence of a plan to swap it with a high-quality replica. So who was truly behind it? Was Laura a mere pawn or a willing accomplice? Is Camilla trying to seize a piece of jewelry? Or a symbolic message about the succession? And as Catherine steps into the spotlight with the icon upon her head, is this a victory? Or a counterattack for which the entire monarchy will pay the price? Buckingham was entering the hours where zero error was the only mandate. A high-level diplomatic event was looming, and for the royal family, the most terrifying thing wasn't the cameras. It was the moment the cameras captured a crack. Catherine had understood this for a long time. She needed no reminder that every movement today would be magnified into a symbol. She could feel the pulse of preparation vibrating through the corridors like an electric current. People moving faster than usual, eyes averting more than usual, and whispers being cut short the moment a third party approached. In this atmosphere, Camilla appeared with the air of one unaccustomed to standing outside the center. She did not rush, yet her presence commanded the space to yield. Camilla went to see Princess Anne, not for a social call, but to make a request: the Rose of Windsor Tiara. A name that sounded like a mere trinket, but within the palace walls, it functioned like a key. Whoever wore it before the cameras would not just be more beautiful, they would be tethered to a narrative of heritage, memory, and trust. Anne looked at Camilla with the eyes of someone who had lived long enough not to be bedazzled by titles. She did not react strongly, replying curtly. The tiara was with the jewelers for maintenance and polishing. It was a polite refusal. Camilla did not flare up immediately. She nodded and departed as if nothing had happened. But in the palace, the most dangerous people are rarely those who scream. They are the ones who remain silent while unable to swallow an insult. Catherine heard of this through a thin veil of information. Camilla wanted it, Anne said no. She offered no comment. She understood the survival rules of such days. Words are useless. It is the imagery that kills. Then, a rumor reached Camilla's ears, swift as a match to a wick. Anne's inner circle was considering granting the Rose of Windsor Tiara to Catherine. No one called it a selection. No one dared call it a bet. But Camilla heard the true meaning. If Catherine wore that symbol before a world leader and the international press, it would be the end of Camilla's illusion that she had been fully embraced. From that moment, Within the same palace, two women began walking down two different corridors. Catherine entered the corridor of restraint. No lapses, no emotions, giving no one a handhold to pull her down. Camilla entered the corridor of obsession, unable to bear the sight of another, wearing what she felt should be hers, even if that ownership remained unspoken. By the end of the chapter, Catherine stood before the mirror, looking not at her face, but at the empty space where a tiara might rest. She did not crave it out of greed. She simply felt a very clear danger. What was approaching was not a piece of jewelry, but a trap. A staff member hurried past, inadvertently dropping a whisper. They say, "Someone is going to be humiliated today." The disappearance happened in the way people fear most, silently. The iconic set was being moved internally along a familiar route, within a window timed to the minute. It did not pass through crowds. It did not stop at unnecessary points. Consequently, when the sealed box was found empty in a moment, no one could explain, the first sensation among the prep team wasn't shock. It was a cold chill. Cold because they understood. This was no oversight. This was a hand that knew exactly what it was doing. Security went into immediate lockdown. There was no ridiculous chaos, only a sequence of decisive actions. Blocking internal exits, checking the access logs, preserving the scene of the box, and pulling surveillance data. Catherine received the news while undergoing the final adjustments to her appearance. She didn't ask many questions, she simply went still for a beat. In her mind, the most terrifying scenario immediately took shape. If the jewelry did not reappear in time, it would have to be replaced with something else. And if that replacement drew suspicion, even a hint of it, Catherine would be the one to bear the brunt of the fallout. In the royal family, a woman does not need to commit a fault to be judged guilty. She only needs to stand in the wrong place, wearing the wrong thing, on the very day the world is watching. Catherine stepped into the hallway, passing a cluster of people tensely maintaining an air of normalcy. She caught sight of Camilla in a corner. Camilla did not look triumphant. She didn't need to. Her composure was a provocation in itself. It was like a voiceless statement. Eventually, everyone will think you are the problem. The surveillance data was extracted and reviewed frame by frame. No strangers, no scuffles, no snatching. And it was that very cleanliness that was terrifying. If there were no outsiders, only one possibility remained. An insider. A security officer pointed to a spot on the screen. There was a brief gap, a camera angle that had been bypassed. A short segment, but just enough for the box to pass through like a shadow. No one said deleted. No one dared say manipulated. They only looked at each other with the eyes of people who understood. Someone had created a moment of blindness. Princess Anne appeared, and the air seemed to compress. She didn't ask if anyone was all right. She asked who touched the box during that interval. The list was pulled. Every name was circled. Catherine stood at a distance, but felt as though she was being pulled into the center. She understood. If someone wanted to, they could spin the story as... Catherine pressured them to wear it, and that's how the trouble started. A dirty story, but an easy sell. Outside Buckingham, the press corps was already waiting for the event. Any sign of abnormality, a blocked path, a delay, and the blunt questions would swarm like carrion birds. What's happening inside the palace? What is the royal family hiding? That was the moment Catherine realized the trap wasn't just about the object. It was about the fact that tonight, the monarchy was not allowed to show even a single ripple of instability. Anne ordered an urgent investigation, not to look for the sake of looking, but to root out whoever dared touch the most sacred items on the most dangerous day. On the access list, there was one name that made Catherine wince. Not because she suspected them, but because it was directly linked to Camilla. The investigation did not unfold as a loud interrogation. It functioned like a net slowly tightening. Because Anne understood one thing: if they made it too loud, the story would leak before they could keep Buckingham's night steady. Anne divided her team into paths, the boxes wrote, those who had handled it, the blind spots in the surveillance data. She allowed no one the luxury of long explanations. To her, the innocent have short, clear answers. Only the guilty need a story. Catherine was forced to continue her preparations as if everything were normal. This was the cruelty of palace life. Even if a storm is raging inside, the face must remain placid. She knew if her hands shook, they would say she was panicking out of guilt. If she remained calm, they would say she was acting. Thus, Catherine chose the only thing left: discipline. She spoke little, asked little, and did not react to the whispers. She maintained a measured expression, but in her mind, she was assembling the pieces. Camilla wanted the tiara, Anne refused. The rumor, Catherine would be given it. And now, the jewelry is gone. It was a line too straight to be called a coincidence. William appeared. He didn't make a scene, but his mere presence stopped some from attempting to blame the woman easiest to blame. William understood the media. He understood how a dirty narrative could swallow Catherine whole. And he understood what Camilla was capable of when backed into a corner. Charles was in a state difficult to define. He did not take a side with his words. He was simply weary. Weary of realizing that more and more things in his own house were spiraling out of control. While scanning the data, security discovered a detail that forced a change in perspective. There were signs that the person who took the item didn't just want to hide it. They wanted to replace it. A new layer of velvet in a secondary box. Traces of preparation so meticulous, it suggested someone had calculated exactly how the gala lights would reflect off the surface. This was the point that sent a chill down Catherine's spine. If the culprit intended to swap it for a fake, the goal wasn't just possession of the heritage. The goal was to create a moment where Catherine would be doubted, questioned, surrounded, and torn apart. A stain that required no proof. Anne did not announce it to the crowd, but she shifted the pace of the investigation. She began tracing outward from the palace, following the lead of who was close enough to prepare a replica. And then, like a protruding thorn, a name emerged from the connections no one wanted to mention. Laura Lopes, Camilla's daughter. No one in the palace spoke the words, "She is the culprit." But the silence that followed the mention of that name spoke for everyone. If the path led to Laura, then who was the shadow standing behind her? Catherine looked at Camilla from afar. Camilla still held her composure, walking past as if she had heard nothing. But one tiny thing betrayed her, the way she gripped her own wrist as if holding an invisible object from falling. Anne signaled the security team, "Go there, now." And there was no longer a storage room. It was a house on the outside. No one wanted to believe the late Queen's jewelry would be sitting outside Buckingham. But sometimes people hide the most dangerous things where few dare to look. in a place bearing the family name. The security team arrived at the home of Laura Lopes. There was no sensational door kicking, only the cold appearance of people who had not come to negotiate. The door opened, and every assumption collapsed in the most brutal way. The authentic jewelry set was found right there. It wasn't stashed in a hurry. It was stored as if waiting for the opportune moment, as if a plan had been finalized, with only one step remaining. But the real blow wasn't just the authentic set. It was the evidence of the replica's preparation, items proving a silent, sophisticated intent to swap, enough to deceive the eyes of viewers through the trickery of lights and distance. Security didn't need a long explanation from Laura. The fact itself was enough. Laura was backed into a corner with no retreat. She was not a woman trained to wear a mask like Camilla. She panicked, and that panic was what made the picture clear. This wasn't a childish prank. This was a targeted, dirty play. The news was immediately relayed to Anne. Anne did not dance around it. She carried the evidence to Clarence House like a blade, not to talk, but to confront. Charles saw the items, saw the evidence, and his gaze seemed to drain of life. For a second, he wasn't the head of the family. He was a man who had just realized the jealousy in his home had bypassed all boundaries. He wanted to exclude Camilla from the night at Buckingham. He wanted to do it now, cut her out, erase her from the frame, a reflex of a man wanting to douse a fire. But William blocked him, not with a raised voice, but with finality. A last-minute change would make the story reek. And once it started to smell, it wouldn't stop at Laura or Camilla. It would coat Catherine, Charles, and the entire monarchy. Therefore, the decision was made in a way that was most cruel to Camilla. She still had to appear at Buckingham, but she would be rendered a shadow. No speeches, no center stage, no moment. Camilla entered Clarence House and saw it all. She could no longer pretend not to know. But she couldn't retreat either, for retreat was a confession. Catherine was there, needing no words. Only her gaze was enough to let Camilla understand. The trap had not snapped as she intended. And in this moment, what Camilla feared most wasn't being scolded. It was being pushed to the margins, right in the place where she wanted to prove she belonged. The night at Buckingham was at the doorstep. Catherine was preparing to step out with the heritage on her head, and Camilla was preparing to step out, as a woman forced to witness her own defeat. Clarence House didn't need shouting to make one feel suffocated. Only the way Anne laid everything on the table, the real jewelry, the traces of the replica's preparation, and the name Laura Lopes, like a needle pinned through the family's honor. Charles stared at the items longer than necessary, as if trying to find a loophole to justify a misplaced trust. But the evidence allowed for no ambiguity. What he felt wasn't just anger, it was shame. Shame because it was happening at the worst possible time, in the worst possible place, right before a night where the royal family could not afford to show a fracture. Catherine stood there, her face a mask of stillness. She didn't need to look triumphant. In this room, merely not falling into the trap was a sufficient response. Camilla entered later. She didn't rush, nor did she tremble. What she brought was a type of composure practiced over a lifetime. The composure of someone who believes there is always a back door through the story of, "I didn't know." But today, Camilla had no clean exit. Anne was brief. She gave Camilla no chance to speak first and steer the narrative. She simply let Camilla look directly at the items on the table. The things Camilla had craved, the things that had vanished, and the things now returning in a way that was hardest for her to swallow. Charles wanted to kill the fire immediately. His first instinct was to pull Camilla from the Buckingham event. He understood that tonight, even one unusual look from Camilla would spark questions. And questions, once they appear, pull a chain of speculation that no one can stop. But William blocked him with the cold sobriety of one who had lived under a microscope since childhood. No debate was needed, no raised tones. Only one reality was enough to silence Charles. A last-minute change is a self-admission that something is wrong. When people smell something wrong, they won't stop at Camilla. They will dissect Catherine and Charles as well. So the final decision was gripped by Anne and set down like a knife. Camilla would still appear at Buckingham. But Camilla would not be allowed to touch any moment of value. No standing where the cameras linger. No being placed next to Catherine during the vital seconds. No part of being seen in the way Camilla hungered for. It was a punishment tailored for someone who lived for the feeling of being accepted. Camilla understood instantly. For a brief second, the mask on her face flickered. She didn't explode, she didn't dare. Because exploding now would be to set herself on fire. Instead, Camilla did what she was best at. She converted her rage into coldness. She left Clarence House with an unhurried gait. But in her mind, she was already rearranging the pieces. If she couldn't have the jewelry, she would destroy its meaning. If she couldn't be the center, she would make that center impossible to inhabit. Catherine felt it like a cold draft against the back of her neck. She knew Camilla would not sit idly by and watch her wear that symbol without striking back. And the night at Buckingham hadn't even begun. It had only just entered its most dangerous phase. The phase where the loser still has time to drag everyone else down with them. A whisper traveled through the wings. The reporters outside are gathering in greater numbers. Someone just suggested they come early. If Camilla couldn't reveal her hand, she would use the cleanest weapons: the crowd and their curiosity. Before a major gala, Buckingham always possesses two layers of tension. The first is the internal preparation. The second is the external questions, the kind that need no evidence to cause harm. In a short span of time, Catherine felt the rhythm of the backstage shift. More messages being relayed, eyes lingering on her longer. No one spoke directly, but something was being seeded into the air, a feeling that something happened regarding the jewelry. Catherine walked through a corridor, and as she neared the entrance to the appearance area, the external questions suddenly pelted in like hail. No speakers were needed. The sound piercing through the doors was enough to make one's stomach knot. Catherine understood the game. Make her tense, make her falter for a beat. Make her show a moment of instability. Then the cameras would capture that exact second, and tomorrow's story would no longer be about diplomacy. It would be about what's wrong with Catherine. William didn't stand in front of her in a theatrical way. He simply appeared at the right time, positioning himself at a distance that forced everything to naturally slow down. When William was there, it was hard to turn Catherine into easy prey for blunt questions. Anne did something Camilla hadn't expected. She signaled a change in Catherine's waiting point backstage, a tiny adjustment, but enough so that Catherine didn't have to pass the hot spot where questions could be hurled at her face. No one called it a plan. It was an instinctive move by someone who had lived long enough to know when a crowd is at its most dangerous. Camilla saw the change, and she understood. the trap to push Catherine out of rhythm had just missed. Camilla didn't give up. She switched to a second method, the method of Cold War, isolation. In parties like this, sometimes all it takes is a well-timed turn of the head, a shortened greeting, a gap beside Catherine left open a little too long. And it's enough for outsiders to think she is being shunned. But today, Catherine didn't let that gap exist. Not by being desperate, but by maintaining a composure so absolute that people couldn't see a crack. She walked like someone prepared for every gaze. She didn't try to pull others close. She let them gravitate toward her out of old habit. Cameras always find the one who doesn't tremble. In another corner, Camilla began to be imprisoned by the punishment Anne had set. She was present, but every time she tried to move toward the center, a coincidental shift would block her. A person standing in the way. A distance maintained. A camera pan that didn't stop. No one scolded Camilla. No one touched her. But Camilla was made to be non-existent in the very place she wished to exist. And the most painful part for Camilla was that the more Catherine was pushed to the center, the harder the plan to humiliate Catherine became. Because Catherine appeared with the iconic jewelry, the jewelry that had returned to its rightful place. No trace of a fake, no moment of panic, no second of delay. There was only an image that was clean, sharp, and unbreakable. The heritage resting on Catherine's hair, like a statement that required no speech. Catherine didn't turn back to look at Camilla. She didn't need to, because today, Camilla's punishment didn't lie in Catherine's eyes. It lay in the eyes of everyone else, in the eyes of the head of state being hosted, in the eyes of the guests, in the eyes of those who had lived in the palace longer than Camilla and understood perfectly who was being placed in the right spot. Camilla stood there, and for the first time that night she understood. Sometimes the most brutal punishment isn't being accused. It's being ignored in front of what you crave most. As Catherine stepped into the main appearance area, an assistant politely intercepted Camilla with a courteous gesture, and Camilla was forced to stand still, watching Catherine enter the frame like someone walking into her destiny. The Buckingham event proceeded in perfect rhythm on the surface. That was what the monarchy needed, but beneath that rhythm, a sentence was being carried out, not with a gavel, but through the arrangement of people. Catherine appeared radiant with the iconic jewelry set. No one needed to name the piece. Merely seeing it, people understood why the air around her seemed thicker. The heritage wasn't just on her hair, it was in the way every eye automatically gravitated toward her. William stood just close enough, not flashy, not performing, but clear as a guarantee, Catherine was not alone. Charles maintained the calm of a king before his guests, but his eyes were heavy. Heavy because he knew what had happened before the night began. And heavier still because he understood. There was no way to go back to how it was. From the moment the heritage was taken, something in this house had snapped. Camilla was present. That was the part she was allowed. The rest, the center, the moment, the lights, she was stripped of through undeniable details. Every time the camera panned, Camilla was just a blur on the edge. Every time the important group stood together, Camilla was positioned a step out of alignment. Every time there was a space near Catherine, that space was immediately filled by someone else. No one told Camilla to step back, but all night, Camilla was forced to play the supporting role. And that was the public humiliation. being treated by the entire room as if she were no longer the one who made the decisions. Backstage, Laura was moved out of the palace's safety circle in a quiet but definitive manner. No stage, no noise, just a disappearance of a certain kind. Those who saw understood, and those who didn't could still feel the excision. Catherine didn't go near Laura. She didn't need to. For Catherine, the important thing wasn't seeing someone being dragged away. The important thing was that the trap had not snapped on her. But the price of victory arrived that very night. As the lights dimmed, Catherine returned to her private quarters, removing the jewelry with a caution that was almost instinctive. She did not gloat. She only exhaled, the breath of someone who had just walked along the edge of a cliff. William was there. He didn't speak words of celebration. He understood this battle didn't end with a "it's over." It ended with a truth. From now on, Catherine would live in the palace as one who knew exactly how far the person across from her could go. Charles had nowhere to hide. He couldn't deny it. He couldn't reclaim Camilla's honor with a few gestures. What Camilla did had pushed him into a state where he had to choose silence to maintain the exterior, while enduring the internal ruin. Camilla returned with her custom-made jewelry. It was still bright, but in the mirror, it couldn't save her from the feeling of emptiness. She had been present all night, yet it was as if she didn't exist. What Camilla lost wasn't diamonds. What Camilla lost was the ability to step into the center without the entire room automatically pushing her out. The dirty player wasn't given a reconciliation hug. There was no making peace, no beautiful message. There was only a punishment in the true royal style, cut from the lights, cut from the recognition, cut from the story. But the story did not end peacefully. It left a cold echo, like a new threat lying in the silence. Camilla had been shamed in the way she feared most, and people like Camilla, once they have lost face, usually do not forget. Catherine closed the door to her room. Alone for a few very brief seconds, she looked at the jewelry lying still. It had returned to its place. She had stepped out in the right rhythm. She had evaded the trap. But from now on, she also understood one thing clearly. In this family, the most dangerous thing isn't the cameras outside. It is the jealousy right inside the house. Will Camilla accept being turned into a shadow forever? Or will she find a way to pull Catherine down with another dirty play? One more sophisticated and harder to trace? And as for Laura Lopes, was she just a pawn being used? Or will she become the crack that causes the family secrets to leak out? Will King Charles continue to stay silent to keep the appearance of peace? Or will he finally be forced to take a side, even if that choice could tear the monarchy in half from the inside? Would you like me to continue this story by writing Chapter 8, or perhaps refine certain scenes to be more descriptive? Share your thoughts with us in the comments section. Remember to like, share, and subscribe for more. Also, click the next video showing on your screen. You will enjoy it.